Week 3 of Writing Assessment Theory and Practice is going to introduce you to some writing assessment methods that you're probably familiar with. I'm also going to introduce you to some writing assessment methods that are pretty innovative and that are newer to the field. Monday's readings will focus on writing assessment methods that you're probably familiar with, portfolio assessment and what's called holistic assessment. These methods are used in writing classes, but they're also used in other disciplines and they're used for several different kinds of tasks. One of these assessment tasks that we deal with in colleges and universities is to place students in the right course. Some institutions, like Shawnee State University, have used the ACT, the SAT, the Compass, and use those scores to place students in the right class. At the time that I'm recording this, there are 4 writing courses that a student might take in their first semester in college. They might take a developmental writing course. They might take a 3-credit-hour credit-bearing composition course, typically for students that are a little bit more prepared. They might take a 4-credit-hour first-year writing course, which is what most students take, or they might even take a 5-credit-hour composition course where they take the class with the 4-credit-hour students, but then they get an extra hour with their writing instructor. This is called the co-requisite model of composition. Students are sometimes placed in these courses by test scores, but it's also true that some institutions sort students using different methods, portfolios being one of those methods. Some institutions use those portfolios, and they argue that portfolios are a more accurate representation of student writing, and it's a more authentic view of a student's writing ability. And it also places them more in control, where they get to select the pieces that end up in that portfolio. In my experience, this is true, but it's also true that portfolios can be tricky to assess and to evaluate, and they are labor intensive, whether you're using them to place students or whether you're using them to assign a grade in a first-year writing course. On Monday, you'll learn about a method of assessment that's a little less in vogue these days, and it's called holisticism. Holisticism posits that you can evaluate a piece of writing without getting too caught up in the individual criteria. You holistically evaluate or assess a piece of writing. When I was a graduate student at California State University, San Marcos, our first-year writing program, every student prepared a portfolio, and we all graded them holistically. They were graded twice. We were given descriptions of what a 6 portfolio would look like, what a 5 portfolio would look like. It was all based on the AP exam, which at the time used a holistic assessment method. We would highlight where that portfolio fell, whether was it more 6 or more 5 or more 4, and wherever we saw the most highlighting, that's generally the score that it got. Ed White, who is he was a staunch proponent of holisticism, and I think he still writes a little bit about it. He's very influential in the field, but you're going to read his essay on holisticism for Monday's class. Monday's readings are pretty important, but I'm super excited to hear what you guys have to say about Thursday's text. We'll continue reading in Maja Wilson's book, and she gives us some different metaphors and different ideas to think about in practicing writing assessment, and I'm interested to see what you think about that. But there's also going to be some innovations in assessment that are maybe a little bit out there that you're going to come across, and I'm interested to see what you think of them. Peter Elbow, who's a very influential figure in writing studies and also writing assessment, we're going to read a couple of his articles, one that he co-authored with somebody else and then one that he wrote on his own. That one's about grade contracts, and the other one's about assessing student writing. We're also going to read Peter Elbow later this term. Again, he's just a super important person in the field. And if you stick around at the end of this video, I'll tell you a short anecdote about the time that I met Peter Elbow at a conference. You're also going to read a short article by Isao Inoue. You're going to read more of him in week 4 in Writing Assessment Theory and Practice. He's a very influential person in the discipline right now, but he writes a lot about grade contracts and what they have to do with race and how grade contracts might alleviate some of the bad practices that might be influenced by institutional and systemic racism. So Isao Inoue, grade contracts, excellent little piece, and we'll read more about that. I'm also going to introduce you to something called ungrading. The piece that you're going to read is written by somebody that's outside composition studies, outside writing assessment. I think think that he's a social scientist, Jesse Stommel. But it's stuff that we're thinking about in the discipline, different ways of assessing writing, and it's pretty innovative. It will make your face melt if you are very tied to traditional grades. I'll leave it at that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about these writing assessment practices. I want to issue a reminder, and I hope I say this enough, that writing assessment really does kind of matter. I think that a lot of times in school, when we take on identities as learners, that's a B student or a C student or something like that, I think a lot of that is tied up in how we are evaluated and how we're assessed as writers, what kind of text that we produce. If you grew up getting a lot of red marks on your essay and your language was made fun of or was deemed non-traditional or non-standard, you probably have a very different relationship with writing than somebody that was praised, that was given a lot of opportunities to revise or to select their best pieces of writing for a portfolio. Assessment matters. It really does. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your thoughts about the text that you're going to read this week, because we get into some of that stuff with these texts. All right. Here's my Peter Elbow story, if you're sticking around this long. So at the Conference on College Composition and Communication, it's kind of like the big conference in writing studies. There's a session on assessment. Isao Inoue was presenting. You're meeting him, and I attended that. Big fan of Isao Inoue's work, but I was listening to this presentation, and it was in a ballroom, and I was kind of towards the front. But there was somebody in the back that that was pretty loud, and actually said something like, "Speak up," or something like that. And I got so annoyed. And if you don't know me, I have a little bit of a potty mouth. So my interior monologue was like, if this says that one more time, and it's after like 3 or 4 times, I'm going to turn around and say something. Said it one more time, "Speak up." And I turned around. It's Peter Elbow. I was like, I'm not going to say anything. But I went up to him afterwards, thanked him for his work, because he's written some really cool stuff and some very influential works in the field, but I didn't say anything about that I found that rude. Anyhow, that's my Peter Elbow story. Hope you all are doing well. Hang in there. This is a tough week, a lot of reading this week. We're going to start getting into the nuts and bolts and actually putting some projects together in the next few weeks, and I'm excited about that. Bye for now.